My journey with my wife began quite serendipitously. We both happened to be strolling home from work. She was accompanied by a friend, and I was with mine. As fate would have it, our friends struck up a conversation and invited me over for a visit, leading to an unexpected friendship that blossomed into love. Fast forward 3 years, we exchanged vows, and 6 years later, the joy of our first child graced our lives. We always yearned for children, but it was a challenging road. Friends often teased us about our attempts, which added a layer of pressure to our hopes. Then came that fateful trip to Talysh, where we spent time at the Holy Spring. Miraculously, just 3 days after our first night there, we discovered that she was pregnant. The joy we felt was indescribable. Our daughter, now almost 4, filled our lives with laughter and light. Yet in 2012, our lives took a downturn when the company I had dedicated 5 years of hard work to succumb to a crisis. Slowly, everything unraveled, and the cash flow that once sustained us began to dry up. The stress began to take a toll on me. One night, I had an unusual dream. You see, my dreams often serve as harbingers, either foretelling good fortune or hinting at misfortune. My intuition has always been sharp, so when I woke up, I felt an unsettling awareness that something was amiss. Driven by curiosity, I decided to investigate. As a programmer, I first printed out her call history, comparing it to what I recalled. That's when I stumbled into troubling territory. She had called a coworker of hers twice, erasing those calls from her history. I thought to myself, what on earth is going on here? This employee worked until 5 p.m., while she didn't finish until 5:30, and the call occurred even later. Before I knew it, I was seized with doubts. The following week, she attended a corporate party, and photos began to appear on social media. Most of them were typical of drunken revelers, but one photo caught my attention. She and that employee were standing together against the wall, seemingly apart from the chaos surrounding them. At first glance, it didn't seem particularly exciting to me, but I began to question her, seeking, as she put it, answers. She insisted that nothing was happening, that she was being faithful. However, the photo with this employee disappeared from her friend's album the very next day. Determined to get to the truth, I decided to dig deeper. I connected her phone to a search engine to track her movements. In January, I noticed that she was returning home from work by an unusual route, an inconvenient detour. When I asked her about it, she swore she was at the mall. However, given the distance from this area to the mall, I knew that the base stations could only pinpoint her location in 2 cases. Either she was really in the area, or she claimed to be in the mall, although in fact she was somewhere significantly higher than the 5th floor. I even experienced it for myself, but the thought of betrayal corroded the very foundation of our family. On top of that, we faced difficulties in our intimate life. My needs were daily, whereas hers were barely twice a month. Just 2 years ago, I was hoping for intimacy at least twice a week, which made me anxious. Then I started noticing an unusual amount of white discharge on her underwear. Yet, merely monitoring her movements didn't satisfy my growing suspicions. I needed more concrete proof. Our intimate life had become strained. I craved closeness, while she often claimed exhaustion from work. In moments of frustration, I resorted to quick relief, with her occasionally offering me a bit of comfort, holding me close. It was a peculiar arrangement, one I found embarrassing to share with my friends. The details were intimate, almost too personal, but she seemed happy to engage. The irony was, while she bombarded me with questions about my day, she hardly offered anything about herself. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living with a stranger. Before all of this unfolded, I viewed my wife as almost angelic. She didn't smoke, rarely drank, and kept our home immaculate, always bustling about with a seemingly perfect figure and long legs. In my eyes, she was the ideal partner. But after uncovering the truth through my investigations, my perception shattered. The crisis hit me hard, especially when I overheard her discussing plans with a friend about some guy they intended to meet up with. It was clear to me they weren't talking about me. My car was in the shop, and trips hadn't been on the agenda. Desperation made me face her. I couldn't contain my suspicions, and the tension went beyond all bounds. One night, in a fit of rage, I smashed our plasma TV with my fist. It used to be a source of joy for me, but now it has become a reminder of my confusion. After that, I left the house in a rage for the whole night. I made the mistake of drinking too much that day, which didn't help matters. Meanwhile, she contacted her mother and said she was taking our child with her. My anger reached its peak, and when my mother-in-law arrived a couple of days later, I couldn't help but feel the walls shrink around me. Once considered the ideal son-in-law, I prided myself on my cooking skills and my intellect. Yet during those conversations, I was reduced to a villain, called a goat, a demon, and a worthless being who didn't contribute financially. My mother-in-law suggested that my wife should leave me, while my wife remained quiet, simply stating that she couldn't be near me. It was a bitter pill to swallow, especially since my wife had never laid a hand on me, and I never intended to hit her. I only lashed out at inanimate objects, walls, televisions, never at her. As it turned out, my wife had a knack for blowing things out of proportion. She complained to her mother about my alleged bullying, which consisted of my silence, a lack of intimacy, and forgetting to buy her flowers. The irony wasn't lost on me. I decided to install call monitoring, believing it would unveil the truth. My mother-in-law's influence loomed large. "Get rid of the demon," she insisted. It felt like a conspiracy against me. Then a strange turn of events occurred. When my mother-in-law took our child away, my wife and I were left alone. Strangely enough, after our heated discussions, a strong attraction arose between us again. We began to rebuild our relationship, renewing our intimacy almost every day. Then, one evening, she confessed that she was probably just obsessed with wanting to be around after an argument. It was a whirlwind of emotions. It seemed to me that I was constantly screaming. Was it like that? But then tragedy struck. Our daughter caught a serious infection, and her temperature rose to 39 degrees, which led to an urgent trip to the hospital. The sight of her in the intensive care unit was heartbreaking. In the midst of this commotion, I found myself hurling accusations at my wife, accusing her of alleged flirting. My mother-in-law's negative energy permeated our situation, increasing my frustration. However, after a course of antibiotics, our daughter recovered, and we decided to lead a more peaceful life. However, my distrust persisted. One of her patients, an unusual interaction with her in dental practice, caused alarm. During the sessions, she seemed overly animated, her official tone sometimes turning into a conspiratorial whisper. Their exchanges were laced with flirtation. I recalled teasing her in bed using the same soft tone, and the memory made me cringe. My heart sank as I listened to the audio again. Familiar sounds of pleasure intertwining with conversation. The realization struck hard. I was not just angry. I was foolish for trusting her. I tried to convince her to confess and repent. I suggested that she get rid of me properly and then confess. In response, she accused me of schizophrenia, insisting that I was losing touch with reality. "All right," I said, "call the receptionist and get me that young man's number." When she made the call, her friend, upon hearing the request, whispered to someone, stifling a laugh before finally providing the number. I quickly searched the number online, and a company popped up linked to that mobile phone. "Look at that," I remarked. "These youngsters are starting their own businesses now." My wife shrugged it off, claiming it was likely her parents' phone line. We pressed on with our investigation. The thought of her infidelity after everything we had been through, especially during our daughter's hospitalization, was like a blow to the heart. It seemed completely unfair. I didn't want to live with someone I suspected of infidelity. But the truth is, I couldn't imagine life without her. My love for her was fading every day, but she was still there, deep beneath the surface. I began to notice a change in her. She no longer seemed as attractive as before. The belly that had once inspired my admiration was now slightly bulging, and her breasts had lost their elasticity. And yet rumors of infidelity continued to cloud our relationship, undermining the foundations of our family. I was afraid that if I left, she would raise our daughter just like her. If it wasn't for our child, I wouldn't hesitate to throw her out and find someone else. But now I was torn apart. Should I just forget everything and reformat my mind, pretending everything is normal, and go back to what it was before?